नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय तले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशकारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा. So thank you very much for joining today's session. We have been discussing from the second chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and we are discussing the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, which is called as Sarartha Varshini. So, in the second chapter, we have been discussing about the symptoms of a self-realized person, Asthita Pragya. As Arjuna asked this question, when in the previous section, Krishna described that how a person who practices Nishkama Karma Yoga, gradually his heart becomes purified, and how he reaches the stage of Jnana Yoga. And at that time, he says that that his intelligence fix Samadav Achala Buddhis Tada Yogam Avapsasi. Krishna says. So this Achala Buddhi is the same as Sthita Pragya. Achala is Sthita, Buddhi is Pragya. So Achala Buddhi means one intelligence does not flicker. And Sthita Pragya is one whose intelligence does not flicker. And such a person is called a Jivan Mukta. Okay. So this transition from Nishkama Karma Yoga to Jnana Yoga was described by Krishna. And now at this point of time, Arjuna wants to know how does one understand if he is ready for this Jnana Yoga? How does one understand whether he is a Sthita Pragya or not? What are the symptoms of a Sthita Pragya? So Arjuna says, Sthita Pragyasya Kabasha Samastasya Keshava Sthitadir Kim Prabhasheta Kimasita Vrajeta Kim. So he says that what are the symptoms of a Sthita Pragya? How does that Sthita Pragya speak? Which means, how does he respond to dualities? Kim Asita, how does he sit? Which means, how does he control his senses when it is not needed to engage the senses? And Vrajeta Kim, how does he move? Meaning, how does he engage his senses when it is needed to engage them? So, in response to this, Krishna answered, if you remember, first he described Stipragyasya Ka Bhasha. Ka Bhasha means what are the symptoms. So Krishna said, Prajahati Yada Kaman Sarvan Partha Manogatan Atmanyeva Atmatushta Sthita Pragyas Tadochate. He said, when a person Yada Prajahati means Prakrishta Rupena Jahati, when he completely gives up Sarvan Manogatan Man, all the desires which are born out of the mind. So Manogatan Kaman means all desires which are born out of the vasanas, material impressions which are stored within the mind. So one who has given up all of that, Atmani Eva Atmana Tushtaha, and one who is satisfied with the soul alone by that mind, Sthita Pragyas Tadochate. Such a person called the soul. When he is only satisfied in aspiring after the soul, to realize the soul and the Brahman and the super soul, you can say. So such a person, one who is absolutely not interested in any materialistic pursuits which are inspired by the material impressions which are stored within the mind, such a person is a Sthita Pragya. Right? So this is the symptom. These are the symptoms of a Sthita Pragya. And then in one verse, so he answers this. And then the next verse, he says, how does he speak? Which means, how does he respond to dualities? Kim prabhashet दुःखेषु अनुद्विग्नमना सुखेषु विगतस्पृहा वीतराग भय क्रोधः स्थितधीर् मुनिरुच्यते. दुःखेषु अनुद्विग्नमना. So such a person is not aggrieved when suffering appears in the form of adhyatmic, adibhautik, adidaivik kleshas. Sukeshu vigata spruha. Sukeshu vigata spruha means when there is an opportunity to enjoy or when there is an opportunity for happiness, he has no desire to enjoy it. So, dukkeshu anudvignamana, sukeshu vigata spruha, vita raga bhaya krodha. And such a person is devoid of attachment, fear, and anger. Sthita pragyastadochyate. So, that's what he says. So his mind is not disturbed by the adhyatmic adibhav adidaivik kleshas. And when someone asks about his welfare, how are you? Or he says that, oh, why are you suffering? He says, oh, prarabdha karma. So I am suffering because of my prarabdha karma. So he's not agitated. So when one perfectly understands that I am not getting anything which I don't deserve, when there is a sense of feeling of justice, then one develops the ability to tolerate the suffering. But when we are not able to ascertain whether it's just or unjust, or if we are convinced that it is not just, then even the smallest of sufferings can give us a lot of pain, right? Like that. So, he says, and false indifference to suffering, the mark of the impostor, however, is detected as such by the wise man. So this is not like a kind of made up false indifference to suffering. He's not just faking it. That is for a that is not for a that is not a genuine person. And in the face of opportunities for happiness also, he is without a desire to enjoy it, because he says to himself that it is simply his prarabdha karma which he must tolerate, like that. Okay. So and in order to make these qualities very clear, it is further mentioned vita raga, vita bhaya, vita krodha. He is devoid of attachment to enjoyment. He is devoid of fear from dangerous things like wild animals, and he is devoid of anger towards friends who have attacked him. And the example that is given is Jada. So in this way, Kim Prabhasheta was answered, and in one more verse this is clarified. Yes, sarvatra nabhishnehas tattat prapya shubhashubham nabhinandanti nadveshti tasya pragya pratishtita. So he says that such a person has no motivated affections. Motivated affection means, oh, I will express my affection to this person because I have some benefit which I can get from him. Even between relatives, you see sometimes, if the other relative is of some utility in terms of some monetary thing or some inheritance or something, then there is affection. But for one, that is why Krishna also says, right? Yasyaham anugrinami harishye taddanam shanaihi tato adanam tejantesya swajana dukkha dukkitam. So if I want to especially show my mercy to someone, I take their wealth away. And when the wealth goes, then one big shelter goes away. False shelter. Okay. So when Krishna says, I take their wealth away, what he means to say is, I take their false shelter away, on which they are dependent. Okay. So, and when when wealth is taken away, then they seek the second false shelter, which is the relatives and friends. But those people also, when wealth goes away, when they understand that there is no utility from this person, they also go away. So, uh, so which means practically people of this world who have material desires, desire for enjoyment, they actually have motivated affection. So they have only motivated affection. They know that if I want to show affection to this person so that I can get something out of it. Okay. But uh, uh, these people, Astita is yes, sarvatra anabhishneha. He has motivated affection at all. Shubha prapya abhinandanti, ashubham prapya nadveshti. It's not rejoice on attaining good fortune. He does not curse on attaining misfortune. Okay. So even though he has no motivated affections, but he can have affection to all living entities to some degree, born out of his compassion or mercy. So that is possible. So and if he gets something favorable, uh, he does not say that, oh, you are very great, like that. Or if someone gives him some nice food when he is on his Madhukari, then he does not say, oh, you are such a great person, like that. And when someone does not give any food or gives, criticizes that person, he does not counter criticize that person. Nabhinandanti nadveshti tasya pragya pratishtita, like that. Okay. Then we saw the third answer to the third question, where Arjuna asks, Kim Asita, how does he sit? Which means, how does he not engage his senses when not needed? So, in response to this, he said, Yada samharate chayam kurmongani va sarvashah indriyani indriyartebhyas tasya pragya pratishtita. So he says, Yada ayam samharate indriyani sarvashah. When he easily withdraws all his senses completely, indriyartebhyah, from the sense objects, kurmaha anganiva, just like a turtle withdrawing his limbs. Tasya pragya pratishtita. He is a person who is situated in samadhi. So it is mentioned that this verse answers how does he sit. He withdraws his senses such as the ear from the objects of the senses such as sound. Now, how he is able to, so we saw that why do the senses get attracted to the sense objects? We saw when the senses look at a sense object or come into a sense object, immediately the mind starts accessing all the past vasanas in connection with that sense object, and uh, then when there is a very pleasant experience with the subject, then the senses pull the mind, and the senses run behind the sense objects. But because this person, by his practice of Nishkama Karma Yoga, has destroyed all the materialistic vasanas, therefore, the senses do not get attracted to the sense objects. So, like that. But then someone may say, what is the big deal in stopping the senses from going after the sense object? Because even a person who does not eat, who fasts, he can resist the temptation, because his senses will become weak and his senses will not go after the sense object. So what is the big deal, someone may say? So he says, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinah Rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. He says one who refrains from eating also stops the sense objects from function. Vishaya nivartante. Okay. Because last time, prana, which gives strength to the senses, especially the karmendriyas, prana comes from an. So when an is stopped, prana becomes weak. When prana becomes weak, the indriyas become weak. When the indriyas become weak, then the mouth, tongue cannot taste, the anus and genitals become weak to function, the hands and legs become weak to function, like that. But this is very superficial, because rasavarjam, the desire to enjoy the sense object, does not go away. The ability to enjoy goes. The ability to enjoy is temporarily gone because the senses become weak due to fasting. But a jnana yogi's refraining from sense objects is not like that. It is not that he has the desire to enjoy, but still, because the senses have become weak due to fasting, therefore he is not pursuing that object of sense gratification. It's not like that. Here, the another reason for not pursuing sense objects is if someone has developed an attraction to a more relishable subject matter or sense object, then the less relishable one does not get attracted. Because this person is attracted to the Atma now, he is no longer attracted to the lower things. So that way he stops his sense gratification, the desire for sense gratification. So that's what here Krishna says, that Shaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinah rajam rasopyasya param drishva nivarte. So but then in the next verse he says that that how this kind of detachment from sense objects due to development of higher taste is possible only by strict sadhana. Prematurely to show such detachment is very difficult. So in order to establish this point, Krishna is yatato hi api kaunteya purushasya vipaschitaha indriyani pramatini haranti prasabam manaha. A person may have very strong theoretical knowledge. Purushasya vipaschita. He's a wise man. He has wisdom, but that wisdom is not realized wisdom. Okay. Purushasya vipaschita. Yatato hi api. He may endeavor to control the senses. Okay. Even for the wise man who endeavors to control the senses, Indriyani pramatini, very strong, adamant senses, manaha prasabam haranti. They can take the mind away by force. So this is not very easy. The effort at the stage of sadhana is very great, without power to turn back the senses completely at all times. So pramatini means causing agitation. So it's not very easy. One may have some theoretical knowledge, very strong theoretical knowledge, but it is not easy to control the senses. The senses are very powerful. Okay. Then he says, but there is a very secret weapon. What is that secret weapon? He says, so the secret weapon. Tani sarvani sanyamya yukta asita matpara. Matpara. Vashehi yasyendriyani tasya pragya pratishtita. He says, yukta, the yogi, matpara, the yogi who is devoted to me. This does not necessarily refer to bhakti yogi, but this refers to a person whose practice includes the element of bhakti practices. It is, he is not just practicing dry jnana, his practice of jnana has the element of bhakti, that is worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is involved in the practice of jnana. That is what is mentioned here as matpara. It's not that suddenly he is talking about pure devotional service. So here it refers to as a secondarily he is devoted to Krishna. The yogi who is devoted to Krishna, tani sarvani sanyamya asita. Such a person can train all the senses and he can remain non-responsive to the objects of sense gratification. So it is possible. So Vashehi yasyendriyani tasya pragya pratishtita. One whose senses have thus been controlled by being devoted to Krishna and of course parallelly practicing Jnana Yoga, such a person is a Sthita Pragya. Right? So Matparaha means my devotee. Without devotion, one cannot conquer the senses. This will be seen everywhere in the later verses of Gita. We saw Prayasha Pundarikaksha Yunjanto Yogino Manaha Vishidanti Asamadhanan Mano Nigraha Karshitaha Atata Ananda Dugam Padambujam Hamsaha Shrayam. So he says that generally the yogis who try to study their mind experience frustration because of their inability to perfect the state of samadhi. Thus, they become very tired in attempting to bring their mind under control. Therefore, intelligent people surrender to your lotus feet like that. Person whose senses have been brought under control is the Sthita Pragya. This distinguishes him from the sadhaka, the person attempting to do so. So this person is the position of the siddha. Perfected person. Perfected jnana yogi. Okay. Whereas this is the position of beginning sadhaka. Okay. Yatato hi api kaunteya purushasya vipaschitah indriyani pramatini haranti prashabam manaha. Prasabam mana. Like that. So this is where I think we ended our discussion, right? So he says that so a perfected jnana yogi has accomplished sense control due to natural detachment, whereas a sadhaka is attempting sense control and he will realize that the senses are very, very powerful. So this is where we ended our discussion last week. Before we start today's discussion from the second chapter, quick discussion points, comments, questions, anything anyone would like to share, ask, add before we move forward. Okay, if there is none, then we will continue our discussion. Okay. Yes, Sachipranto.
Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam, Prabhuji.
Prabhuji,
it is like sometimes we have a knowledge, we know that it is, senses are very powerful, but in association of, when we have association, it is the same knowledge is helpful for practicing and application. But the knowledge is there, but when you are alone practicing bhakti, because everywhere you may not get, a temple, have morning sadhana, attend Mangalarti, and have study devotional service. So most of the time, it is not possible. Everyone may not be so fortunate. So in that case, that particular, devotee is, despite of his efforts, is, practicing, like last week I'm discussing about the impressions in the mind, like, whatever. So So it is very difficult to practice bhakti in a steady way in a
Hmm.
place where there is no temple.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because
Nah.
you may be because when we are in associate devotee also we have a temple, so naturally it becomes we are habitually going temple or mangalarti, and it becomes so easy for to control the the things. But when you are alone and there is no temple worship is there nearby, no temple, and even if you try to do it same thing on visual or attending something, but it is not so effective in practicing devotional life.
Correct. That is very much correct. That is why we should
Mm,
that's why we should understand. So that's why we should endeavor our best to create association wherever it is there. If virtual
mm,
association is not good enough, then at least one or two persons we have to invest in inspiring them, and so that we can come together every once in a while, whatever is practically possible.
mm,
And also it is it's a very humbling experience, which is very good, that we just know that
mm,
how much of our devotional power is borrowed and how much
mm.
actually builds to ourselves. It's a very good reality test for us. So
Yes, Ravi.
and it is good actually. So that way we can seek the association more sincerely. This kind of reality test helps us appreciate the association of devotees very nicely.
Mm,
Otherwise, those who have constant association, it's very
mm,
likely that they will take that association for granted and not
mm,
realize that how much of their own practice, the strength for how much of their own practice is actually borrowed from the association of this. So it is actually good uh, that at least this will help us develop a very strong appreciation for association of devotees, and then it will push us in a direction where we somehow try to create some association, uh, so that we can stay in their association and practice devotional service little in a little better way. So yes, what you say is definitely correct, and that is the conclusion of Bhagavatam also. That is the conclusion of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita also. That uh, that the root of devotional seed is association of devotees, and even after one achieves the stage of Krishna prema, then still
mm,
the association of devotees remains the most important element in a devotee's life.
mm.
So, therefore, it's very difficult. So therefore, there is no solution to it. We have to seek association wherever we are if we want to improve our standard of practice of devotional service. That is the only solution.
Mm. Thank you, Prabhuji. I want another just subsequent. I think not a question but a thought process, Prabhuji. We have many of us has a smartphones, and many
Mhm,
classes we are hearing. Now
mhm,
most of the classes were downloaded when we can hear, but many time when we are online,
mhm.
usually some people will send message. That's where some news come that comes. So many material impressions. Automatically you don't have to seek that, but because you are carrying a phone with the enable internet or something, so you are you are naturally inclined to look into other aspects of what is going on here, what is going on there, and this material impressions also not healthy for our devotees who are practicing steady devotional life. So
Yeah,
are that particular devotee should give up that mobile with the internal inability, because if that he give up, then he is bereft of all hearing lectures.
yeah, I
Mm,
understand. But if that devotee can function on a professional front without that, then we can
mm,
definitely, arrange something, for One can download it once from someone else's, or one can download it in laptop, and then transfer it to the phone or something like that, and then uh, one can always hear the downloaded lectures. So that while moving around in our pocket, we don't necessarily have to have internet enabled phone.
Mm.
So, but what you say is 100% right, that it is a tremendous source of distraction which can take our mm, solid mental power away from Krishna consciousness. It's actually not good. And most of us probably are not very mm, powerful enough to resist the misuse of the facility that is there. And most of us may have a lot of time also. So, so it is not a very good combination. So we have to individually see what we can do. Sometimes for personal reasons, it may not be possible for us to give it up completely. So then we have to see, there are things like, you can say like parental control things, apps are there, which, I mean, they need not be just for children, but even adults can make good use of that.
Okay.
So one can install, and then the password can be there with some other person, and only certain particular sites can open. You can enable. There are ways of doing that only, so that way it can bring in some kind of
Discipline.
discipline. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Because
Thank you.
we say that, because someone may say, "Arey Prabhuji, what is the big deal? अरे parental control सब क्या है? मतलब ये सब what the one should have the sort of tolerance from inside. ये सब external सब what big deal? People may say like that. Um, uh, they say that what do they say? Morality is the lack of opportunity.
Yes,
So,
sir.
so this is, people may say, आपका ये कौन सा morality है? This kind of morality is just lack of opportunity. You don't have opportunity, that's why you are moral. But the moment you get opportunity, you will not be moral. So ये कौन सा बड़ा बात है? People may say like that. But the point is, lack of opportunity is the best starting point of morality. That is what Krishna would say. Krishna would say in the next chapter. Krishna, when he speaks about lust, he will say there are three places of residence of lust: the senses, the mind, and intelligence. He says lust remains in senses, mind, and intelligence. And he says the easiest way to address lust is through senses, which means don't give any opportunity for the senses to come in touch with sense objects. Rather, give them favorable engagement. Give them favorable Krishna conscious engagement, but strictly stop any opportunity for the senses to come in touch with material sense objects. So, which means basically Krishna is telling lack of opportunity. He says, if you want to control lust and become a moral person, lack of opportunity is the beginning point, he says. So if someone says, "Ye kaun sa bada baat hai? This is just lack of opportunity," we can say, yes, उतना बड़ा बात नहीं है. तो मेरा capacity उतना ही है. And over a period of time, we will see that how that lack of opportunity gave opened up new doors where the mind had no other option. The mind had no other option to, anyway, because you asked this question, I will just touch this point. So basically, the mind, the role of mind is thinking, feeling, and willing.
Mm.
So this is the mind. Okay. And the mind, it does thinking, feeling, and willing based on the vasanas. And how does the mind gather vasanas? The senses. Ear, eyes, tongue, skin, and nose. Okay. So when all these senses come in touch with the sense objects, that experience gets registered in the mind in the form of vasanas, and the mind thinks, feels, and wills based on these vasanas. Okay. And generally, if you see the mind has a surface, and the mind has its, you can say, deeper recess. Okay. So the mind has the surface and the mind has the deeper recess. Generally, whatever fresh impressions are accumulated through the nose, ears, eyes, tongue, and skin, they get stored in the surface. These are the surface impressions. But whatever was experienced weeks before, months before, years before is also there in the deeper recess of the mind. And by our practice of bhakti, slowly the old vasanas can get erased. But the newer vasanas, the surface vasanas, have to be managed. How to manage them? Savai Manak Krishna Padaravindayor Vachamsi Vaikunta Gunanu Varnane Karau Harer Mandira Marjanadishu Shrutim Chakara Achyuta Satkatodaye Mukunda Lingalaya Darshane Drishau, and so on, where it is mentioned how Ambarish Maharaj used to engage all the senses in activities of Krishna consciousness. So what happens? Only Krishna conscious impressions get accumulated in the surface. Of course, old impressions, it will take some time to go away, but at least the surface impressions are only Krishna conscious impressions, because our nose, ear, eyes, tongue, skin is all engaged only in Krishna conscious activities. So the fresh, newer impressions are all Krishna conscious impressions. So the mind, nature of the mind, one good thing about for us is that the nature of the mind is that it will make best use of the bad bargain. This is the nature of mind. I will give you an example for this. When I was in my boarding school, it was Sainik school. So we were all trained to enter into the armed forces. So in that particular school, practically everyone would eat non-vegetarian food. But because I grew up in a proper Sri Vaishnav family where hardly even onion and garlic were used in our cooking. So for me to change to non-vegetarian was practically impossible. I tried. Everyone was pushing me because practically out of 600 people, students in our school, hardly 5-6 of us were vegetarians. The rest were all non-vegetarians. And even in that 5-6, 3-4 will become non-vegetarians in 1 year or so. And then, but new people will come out of which another 3, 4 would be vegetarians like that. So like that, for me, it was impossible for me to become a non-vegetarian, even though I tried. I tried a few times, but the smell was too difficult for me to tolerate. It was not possible. I remember uh, we used to have summer vacation and winter vacation during the year. So during summer vacation and winter vacation, we used to go home. So after staying at home for 1.5 months, when we used to come back, because our school was very close to a river, the major meat which they used to make was they used to make a lot of fish, and the whole mess, uh, and the plates and the glass, everything used to smell like fish. Whether it is for vegetarians or non-vegetarians, there was no separate vegetarian plate and non-vegetarian plate. It was same thing. Plate, glasses, all of that used to smell like fish. And you used to, from a distance about half a kilometer away from the mess, it used to smell like fish. So after spending 1.5 months at home eating mother cooked pure vegetarian food, when I used to come the first day to the school, on my first day night, when I used to go to the mess for dinner, invariably I never used to eat because the smell would be intolerable. Everything would be smelling like fish. It was so intolerable. Then I would not eat. I would go to the hostel, and because we had just come from home, there used to be some mother homemade chakli wakli and all those things. So I used to eat that and just move on for. But this would go on for 1 or 2 days only. After that, it would get over. How much chakli you can eat? Everything gets over. Then after 2 days, you will feel hungry. So then slowly, without, then you start eating. And in those days, we used to have every Wednesday afternoon, we used to have some special food, ceremonial lunch. So Wednesday afternoons and Friday nights, we used to have ceremonial lunch and ceremonial dinner. The ceremonial lunch means instead of white rice, there would be pulao, and there would special non-vegetarian preparations for the non-vegetarians, and some special vegetarian preparations for the vegetarians, like cutlets and things like that, custard, cutlet, some sweets like that. So, uh, so within a few days, so the first day, second day, Monday, Tuesday used to be very difficult. Sunday, Tuesday, but when Wednesday afternoon comes, then there is special food. So there is some eagerness to eat. You start eating with lot of relish. Nothing has changed. The plates and glasses are still stinking like fish only. Nothing has changed. But the mind starts searching for the best amongst what is available. When you tell the mind only this will be provided, then the mind will start searching for the best of the available things. So when I was thinking I can never eat in this mess, I was literally crying on the first day. Tears were flowing, and I went out without eating anything. But within 2 days, the mind was fantasizing about Wednesday afternoons and Friday nights, the ceremonial lunch and ceremonial dinner. Nothing has changed. Everything is still stinking like fish only. But the mind has this ability to adjust, that it will search for the best available sense gratification. So within that stinking mess, the best available sense gratification was on Wednesday nights and on Wednesday afternoons and Friday nights. So the mind very quickly got adjusted to it. So this is the This nature of mind is very good actually for us. In Kapiladev says in Srimad Bhagavatam, Narakastopi deham vai puman natyaktum ichchati. So he says that even when a living entity goes to Naraka and suffers hellish suffering there, still the living entities don't want to give up their body in Naraka. They want to stay in Naraka. Why? Because he says in Naraka also, between the torturous suffering, the living entity finds some very little meager scope for sense gratification and gets attached to it. This is the nature of mind. Mind very quickly gets adjusted to available sense gratification. So what sense gratification to make available to the mind is in our hands actually. By addressing what we are going to feed to our nose, ears, tongue, because for us it is easier to control the senses than the mind. Like say for example, how many of you chant 16 rounds every day? Can you please raise your hands? Only Sachipra and Prabhu? Okay, few more are raising their hands. Right. Oh, more people are chanting 16 rounds. Okay. So practically everyone is chanting 16 rounds. So now, how many of you? Okay, now you can put your hands down. I'm going to ask the next question. How many of you, your mind never gets distracted? You're able to think about Krishna while chanting all your rounds, 16 rounds. Anyone? Not a single person, right? Okay. Now, how many of you hear Bhagavatam or some Krishna conscious topics during the week? If not every day, at least once in few days. How many of you hear some Krishna conscious katha or topics? Very good. How many of you? Okay, now you can put your hands down. You can put your hands down. But how many of you, while hearing Krishna katha, your mind never gets distracted and is always able to think about Krishna? Anyone? Except for Sachipuran Prabhu, no one's, everyone's mind get distracted. Only Sachipuran Prabhu's mind never gets distracted. He says, he's raising his hands. Okay. So at least a vast majority are agreeing that. Okay. How many of you take darshan of deities? If not physically, at least, you know, netrotsav photos you get, you do take darshan, right? Or you may have home deities also, you may take darshan. Okay, you can put your hands down. How many of you, while taking darshan of deities, your mind never gets distracted? Anyone? No one, right? So similarly, all of you must be eating prasadam, all of you must be sometimes embracing the devotees, you know, touching the form of the Lord while massaging and all that. So therefore, it is easier to engage our senses in Krishna conscious activities, but it is very difficult to engage the mind. But if we are not engaging our senses in Krishna conscious activities, it is impossible to engage the mind. So therefore, the beginning is to actually give Krishna conscious engagement to the senses. That's why Krishna says, Tasmatvam Indriyani Adau Niyamya Bharatarshava. Start with regulating your senses, which means by giving it Krishna conscious engagement. So when constantly by giving Krishna conscious engagement, the surface impressions all become Krishna conscious. This is called, I mean, this is called means not by acharyas, but I call it surface impression management. SIM, surface impression management. So if we manage the surface impressions by as much as possible, constantly giving Krishna conscious engagement to our senses, especially the Gyanendriyas, then what happens? The mind, we are controlling the uh, the food for the mind. The food for the mind is all Krishna conscious. So it will say, अरे ये जपा जपा बहुत हो गया अभी, थोड़ा ग्रेटिफिकेशन चाहिए. तो क्या ग्रेटिफिकेशन अवेलेबल है? हाँ, प्रसादम. और क्या है? चलो जाके थोड़ा डीटीज का दर्शन लेके आते हैं, मतलब थोड़ा लेट्स गो एंड टेक. आज कौन सा ड्रेस पहना है भगवान ने, लेट्स गो एंड टेक दर्शन. अरे बहुत सुन लिया, आई हर्ड टू मच, आई डोंट हैव कैपेसिटी टू हियर मोर, लेट मी स्पेंड सम टाइम, थोड़ा कीर्तन में जाके बैठता हूँ. So the mind, when the mind has no other scope for other gratification, the nature of mind is it will search for the best of the available gratification. So if we give only Krishna conscious gratification, mind will not have a problem. Mind will search for uh, the best available gratification. But if we keep giving it non-Krishna conscious gratification, because we have lived in this material world for so long, and we have attachment to things of this material world much more than the attachment that we have for Krishna. So therefore, even little bit of sense gratification opportunity that is there, even though 95% we give our senses Krishna conscious engagement, but 5% also we give non-Krishna engagement. But if we have more attachment to that 5%, then the nature of the mind is to go and sit on the best of the available opportunity. If the best of the available opportunity is non-Krishna conscious, then the mind will go and dwell naturally on that one. So therefore, eventually we can address this only by starting with the senses. Somehow or other, even though, because I was sharing the other day that many times we think that Prabhuji, don't practice bhakti mechanically. But we say you have to practice bhakti spontaneously, from the heart, spontaneously. But I would say spontaneously we can do only gratification, because spontaneous bhakti to bahut dur ki baat hai. It's a very high thing. So there are three things. Okay, if you are insistent on doing spontaneous, we can do only spontaneous sense gratification. But higher than that is mechanical devotional service. And still higher than that is spontaneous devotional service. Okay. We say that don't do mechanical devotional service, do spontaneous devotional service. But uske liye adhikar chahiye. But better than, we may say that spontaneous devotional service is better than mechanical devotional service. That is true. But what is more relevant for us is mechanical devotional service is better than spontaneous sense gratification. Because spontaneous devotional service हमको spontaneously नहीं आता है. Sense gratification is spontaneously आता है. So first we have to focus on mechanical devotional service. Mechanical devotional service मतलब क्या है? मन लगे या ना लगे, इंद्रियों को तो लगाना ही चाहिए. इंद्रियों, if the senses engage in Krishna conscious activities, automatically mind will follow. So, but if the senses are not engaged in Krishna conscious activities, then the mind can never think of Krishna. So while our senses are engaged in activities of sense gratification, our mind can never think of Krishna. We saw a practical example of that. Even when our senses are engaged in Krishna conscious activities, for our mind to think of Krishna is difficult. So how would it be possible for our senses to be engaged in non-Krishna conscious activities and for the mind to still think of Krishna? That's practically impossible. So first thing is to start with giving constant Krishna conscious engagement for our senses. When that happens, then gradually engaging the mind would be possible. Like once His Holiness Gaur Krishna Maharaj he was speaking with a devotee and he asked, क्या आपका 16 माला हो रहा है कि नहीं? तो बोले नहीं महाराज, नहीं हो रहा है. तो महाराज ने पूछा क्यों नहीं हो रहा है? एंड उन्होंने बोला मन नहीं लग रहा है महाराज, मन नहीं लग रहा है. तो महाराज ने पूछा तो जपा नहीं करेगा तो मन लग जाएगा? If you don't do japa, if you don't do japa, your mind will get absorbed, like that. So which means the means for your mind to get absorbed is only when the mind gets the favorable impressions, favorable Krishna conscious impressions for the mind to dwell on. But if our senses are not providing those favorable Krishna conscious impressions for the mind to dwell on, how is it possible for the mind to think of Krishna? तो वही महाराज पूछ रहे हैं, तो जपा नहीं करेगा तो लग जाएगा मन, कैसे लगेगा? नहीं लगेगा. I don't know. Is that relevant, Sachi Pranto?
Yes, Prabhuji. Perfectly. Thank you so much. Nicely explained, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Any further discussion points, questions, comments before we move on to today's discussion? Anything? Okay. So if there is no further questions or discussion points, we will move on to today's discussion. So in the previous verse, Krishna told, Tani sarvani sanyamya yukta asita matpara vashehi yasyendriyani tasya pragya pratishtita. So for one who is devoted to me, for one who is matpara, then such a person can restrain his senses and not respond to the onslaughts of the sense objects. So which means for one who is not attached to worshipping Krishna, such a person cannot really control his senses. That is what the verse says, indicates. So now, what if someone is not worshipping Krishna? So what will be his situation? Okay. So, then what is the position of a person who cannot control his mind because he is not worshipping Krishna? So then Krishna says, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsa Sangasteshu Pajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha Kamat Krodho Vijayate. So he says, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsaha. For the person who meditates on the sense objects, meditation is done on the platform of mind. So he is thinking about the sense objects. So when he thinks of the sense objects, what happens? Sangaha teshu upajayate. For him, he develops attachment. So first he looks at an object, then he thinks about it, अच्छा लग रहा है, मतलब it looks like it is good. Then comes attachment. Attachment तो अरे वो खाऊंगा तो अच्छा लगेगा. So first he thinks of a rasgulla, and then so that is dhyayato. Then comes sanga, means अरे वो खाऊंगा तो बहुत अच्छा लगेगा. And then comes sangat sanjayate kamaha. Kamaha means अरे मुझे वो खाना ही चाहिए. I want to eat it. So then when that desire comes, he will act on that desire. He will get a rasgulla. But if someone snatches that rasgulla from him, or someone says, "Hey, मुझे भी आधा दे दो ना," so what happens? Kamat krodho bijayate. When the desire is stopped, kama leads to krodha. When desire is fulfilled, kama leads to lobha. Okay. So here he says, first comes dhyayato. From that comes sanga, attachment. From sanga comes kama. When kama is fulfilled, it leads to lobha. When it is not fulfilled, it leads to krodha. Okay. So he says the sthita prajna controls also the mind. That indeed is the cause of the control of the senses. So how is he able to control the senses? Because a sthita prajna is able to control his mind. If one does not have control of the mind at all, then please hear the result. If one cannot control the mind, then this is what happens to him. First he meditates. Even before dhyayato comes the senses. Senses touch the sense objects. Okay, when the senses touch the sense objects, then the mind immediately starts meditating on that. Then comes sanga, from sanga comes kama. Kama when fulfilled leads to lobha, when frustrated it leads to krodha. So a person who thinks of the sense objects develop attachment to them. Sanga. And by that attachment develops a strong desire for those objects. From desire, anger develops due to obstruction to fulfilling his desire caused by someone or something. Kamat krodho vijayate. Then we will complete this verse also. Krodhat bhavati sammohah, sammohat smriti vibramah, smriti bramshat buddhinasho, buddhinashat pranashyati. So he says, krodhat, from anger, bhavati sammohah. Sammoha means bewilderment, complete bewilderment. Sammohat smriti vibrama. And when one gets bewildered, one loses his memory. Smriti bramshat buddhi namasho. When the memory is lost, it leads to loss of intelligence. Buddhi nashat pranashyati. When the intelligence is lost, one completely becomes distant. Okay. So what is this? What are these terminologies listed? What is this sammoha? What is this smriti vibrama? What does he forget? Okay. And what is this loss of intelligence? And what is this pranashyati? What is this being destroyed completely? What are these things? Right. So he says, from anger it develops absence of discrimination of what should be done and what should not be done. So when one becomes consumed by kama or lobha, it leads to sammoha, bewilderment. Bewilderment means what? A confusion about what is right and what is wrong. So he loses the discrimination. Bhavati sammohaha. So then he says that this is what is sammoha, discrimination of what should be done and what should not be done. Sammohat smriti vibhrama. From bewilderment develops loss of remembrance of one's own benefit derived from the instructions of the scriptures. Okay. Or Baldev Debushan in his commentary he says that he forgets how the scriptures say how to uh, how one should not yield to sense gratification, what are the benefits of not responding to sense gratification, and all those instructions on how to stay away from sense gratification, what we should do when 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 we get an opportunity for enjoying, how to say no, all those instructions of the scriptures. If one goes from dhyayato to sanga to kama to krodha or stage, if one comes at that stage, it is impossible to remember the instructions. चलो चलो शास्त्र क्या बोलते हैं, गुरु साधु शास्त्र क्या बोल रहे हैं, सोचो सोचो सोचो, वो सोच नहीं सकते हैं वो टाइम पे. So then from that comes buddhinashat. So from that smriti bramshat buddhinasho, from that comes a destruction of resolve for spiritual practice. So this loss of buddhi means what here? Determination. Okay. See, actually, if you see, intelligence has many aspects. One is discrimination. Okay. Another is memory. Memory is also an aspect of intelligence only. The third is determination. Okay. So discrimination, memory, determination is all aspects of intelligence only. So here he says that dhyayato vishayan pumsaha. When you meditate on it, you get sangha. Sangat sanjayate kama. So this dhyayato, sangha and kama indicates surrender of mind. Three stages of surrendering of mind. But इसके बाद क्या आता है? कामात क्रोधो भी जायते. So krodha, sorry, krodha. So these are like krodha also surrender of mind. 4 levels of surrender of mind. But from krodha comes sammoha. Sammoha means loss of discrimination. Then sammohat, what is right, what is wrong, you forget it. Sammohat smriti vibhrama. Smriti vibhrama means loss of memory. अरे शास्त्र ने, गुरु साधु शास्त्र ने क्या बोला, when lust at what I should do, they will forget. And smriti bramshat buddhinasho. So buddhinasha here refers to the third aspect of intelligence, which is loss of determination. अरे चलो 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 चलो, कुछ तो साधना करके come out of your situation. वो बोलते हैं अरे अभी कुछ नहीं होगा मेरे से. That the determination to get over that struggling situation, one loses the determination. So these are 3 stages of surrendering of intelligence. So the mind surrenders, then mind pulls the, so first the senses surrender, then the senses pull the mind and the mind surrenders, and mind pulls the intelligence and the intelligence surrenders. So even though later, I think, or did we already see Indriyanam hi charatam yanmano anuvidiyate? I think this is in this chapter only. Yeah. Here he says, Indriyanam hi charatam yanmano anuvidiyate tadasya harati pragyam vayur navam ivambasi. How? He says, one of the moving senses which the mind follows steals away the intelligence as the wind moves about on the water. So the sense objects are controlling the senses. The senses are controlling the mind. The mind steals away the intelligence. So that is elaborated here. That is elaborated here, as we saw that. So first the senses pull the senses, and the senses pull the mind, and the four stages of surrendering of mind: dhyayato, to sanga, to kama, to krodha. And when krodha, lobha, so you can also put lobha here. When it is fulfilled, it leads to greed. When it is not fulfilled, it leads to anger. Then this krodha and lobha lead to sammoha. Loss of discrimination is one level of surrender of the intelligence. Then the loss of memory is the second level of surrender of the intelligence, and loss of determination is the third level of surrender of the intelligence. Then he says that buddhinashat pranashyati. Then one falls into the hole of samsara, complete. Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jatare shayanam. Iha samsare bahudustare kripaya pahe parimura. Kripaya pare pahi murare. Pajagovindam, pajagovindam. Like that. So, therefore, how this whole thing happens, this is described in detail here. The various, how the senses pull the sense objects, and the sense objects pull the senses, and the senses pull the mind, and the mind pulls the intelligence, and then finally the intelligence pulls the soul into samsara. And that is elaborated here. 4 levels of surrender of the mind, and 3 levels of surrender of the intelligence, and finally the soul also is pulled to surrender to samsara, like that. So this is what he says: if one does not control one's mind by spiritual practices, then this is what happens. Then there is dhyayato vishayan sangaha kamaha krodhaha sammohaha smriti vibrama buddhinasha pranashyati. These are the stages that he is talking about. Any quick discussion points, comments, questions here? Anything anyone would like to share, ask, add? Okay, if there is no discussion points or questions or comments, I think we will move on to the next verse. Okay, so next he says, Ragadvesha vimuktaistu vishayan indriyais atmavashair vidheyatma prasadam adhigacchati. So this answers the 4th question of Arjuna, which was Vrajeta Kim. How does he engage his sense? So, which means, or Vrajetakam means, how does he walk? So how does he engage his senses? That is the question. So he says, Videyatma, one whose mind is submissive. Vishayan indriyais charan. and who engages in the sense objects with the senses. So when the mind becomes submissive, so mind becomes submissive means what? It is not doing dhyato, sanga, kama, krodha or lobha. That is not happening. So when one's mind becomes submissive, submissive means submissive to the intelligence, not to the senses. So submission means to a higher authority. The authority higher to the mind is senses. Sorry, the intelligence. So submissive means when the mind becomes submissive to the intelligence, Vishayan Indriyais Charan. And this submissive mind is engaging the senses in the sense objects. But Raga Dvesha Vimuktaihi. Generally, for a normal person, his engagement of the sense objects with the senses happens due to raga and dvesha. When there is, whatever we have deep attachment to, we want our senses to engage with that object. Whatever we have deep repulsion from, we don't want to engage our sense with those objects, right? So, but for a person who is Vidheya Atma, for one whose mind is completely under the control of the intelligence and not of the senses, for him, he is free from Raga and Dvesha. So Raga Dvesha Vimuktais Vishayan Indriyais Charan. So he can engage the sense in the sense objects without any Raga and Dvesha. Because even a Jnana Yogi has to maintain his body and soul together to perform his sadhana. So for that, he has to eat, he has to walk, he has to drink, he has to breathe, right? He has to see things, what is nourishing, what is not nourishing, what he should eat, what he should not eat. So in order to engage, he has to practically engage all his senses in the sense objects. But such a person who is Videyatma, mind is controlled, he does not have to do it due to raga and dvesha. He does purely out of duty. I need to maintain my to practice my sadhana. So therefore he engages. Raga vimuktais to vishayan indriya charan avashai. So under the control of mind, prasadam adhigacchati. So such a person attains peace. So this is how a sthita pragya engages its senses. So you will see a self-realized person also eat. You will see a self-realized person also sleep. But that is not under raga dvesha, that is under a mood of duty-bound consciousness. I have to maintain my body in order to perform my sadhana. For that, I have to eat, I have to see certain things, I have to hear few things. So he engages all his senses, but without any raga and dvesha. Of course, this is a sthita pragya. But we cannot artificially say, "Arey, mujhe bhi kuch raga dvesha nahi hai, वैसा नहीं है." So that is why we have to constantly give Krishna conscious engagement to the senses, so that mind will develop some raga towards within that. जो भी available Krishna conscious gratification के अंदर ही वो राग और द्वेष उनका हो जाएगा, उसमें से then he will engage like that. Okay, we will just see the purport and then we will open up for some discussion points or questions. So he says, this verse answers the question, how does the sthita pragya go? Vrajeta kim. The Lord explains that it is not a fault to accept the object senses if it is done with the controlled senses, with the absence of attachment of the objects in the mind. अगर मन में राग और द्वेष, मन राग और द्वेष रहित हो, देन विद दैट माइंड, फिर इंद्रियों के प्रति इंद्रियों इंद्रिय और इंद्रिय वस्तु संगम हो, you know, the senses can come in touch with the sense objects if the mind is free of raga and dvesha, and such a person is asthita pragya. According to Amarakosh, Vidheya means submissive, situated in words, compliant, controlled, well-behaved, polite, and equal. One whose mind is submissive to instructions, okay, attains peace, okay. Who contacts objects with senses controlled by the mind, senses devoid of attachment and repulsion, attains peace. So, if the mind is submissive to the instructions of the intelligence, and when that mind is controlling the senses, and even if the senses may come in touch with the sense objects, that person will not be affected. Contacting the sense objects is not a fault. Rather, it is a good quality for one who does so with control. Vidheyatma. In other words, for the Sthita Pragya, accepting the renunciation of enjoyment of objects, either by withdrawal of the senses or by engaging the senses, is beneficial. Kim asita vrajeta kim. Asana and vrajana, sitting or walking, engaging or disengaging. For Sthita Pragya, both are equally beneficial. Because a Sthita Pragya is not defined by engagement of senses or non-engagement of senses, but a Sthita Pragya is defined by freedom from Ragadvesha. Ragadvesha vimuktaistu vishayan indriyaicharan atmavashair vidheyatma prasadam adhikachati. So, what defines a Sthita Pragya is actually freedom from Raga and Dvesha. Like that. So, in this verse, he says, how Vrajeta Kim? How does he engage? He engages by the controlled mind. Atma Vashair Vidheyatma. One whose mind is submissive can engage the sense objects with the senses as long as his mind is free from raga and dvesha. And if the senses are under the control of the mind. So, mind controlled by intelligence and senses controlled by that controlled mind. When those senses engage with the sense objects, then engagement of the sense objects will lead to peace. Otherwise, if the mind is not under the control of the intelligence, and if the senses are not under the control of the mind, when those senses come in touch with the sense objects, it will lead to agitation. It will lead to agitation. But if the mind is controlled by the intelligence and the senses are controlled by the controlled mind, then even when those senses come in touch with the sense objects, it will lead to peace. Prasadam adhigachati. Any quick discussion points, comments, questions, anything anyone would like to share as add? One hand is up. If the devotee is not from the doctor's group, you can please ask your question in the chat box, because this is a private session. This is exclusively for Bhaktivedanta Hospital doctors. So for those of you who may not be in that group, can please ask your questions in the chat box and we will take the questions. Yes, Sachitranto.
How to understand the spiritual raga and dvesha in the case of this is applicable to only a condition living entity?
We are just talking about conditions also. We are not talking about spiritual raga and spiritual. No, we are not talking about that.
Okay, Prabhu. So any person, like suppose here you are mentioning about sadhakas, but those who are pure devotees of the Lord, sometimes a person he's his anger is not on the platform what person who's having
Yeah,
raga dvesh.
no, that is a totally different. That's a
Yeah.
that's on a different platform. We are not touching that because here we are not discussing pure devotees. Here we are discussing that just the Jnani Sthita Pragya. A Jnani Sthita Pragya is he does not have any transcendental anger and all those things.
Mm. Okay, Prabhu.
That's a perfected devotee only has all that.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else anyone would like to share as add? Any final questions, comments? We have just 2 minutes left. I don't want to take a new verse now. But if there are, okay, there is one thing in the chat box here. A Sthita Pragya person is already detached. So why it is said he should be free from? No, this verse does not say that he should be free from aversion. This verse says that he is free from aversion. This verse is not a normative verse. This verse is not telling what a Sthita Pragya should do. Rather, it's what a Sthita Pragya does. This describes a Sthita Pragya rather than giving instruction to a Sthita Pragya. A Sthita Pragya cannot be instructed like that. Okay. I think we'll pause here and continue this discussion. Actually, next Friday, I will be traveling. I have some other important commitment next Friday. I will not be able to take the session. So next one Friday, we will have to cancel it. So I apologize, before only. So next Friday, I will not be able to take, but the Friday after that, we will continue this discussion. So thank you very much for your patient listening and your enthusiastic participation. So we will meet again next Friday. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur Pad ki jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.